Hello everyone, this is Grace here. In this video, we will be discussing illustration 16, determining time of supply. So these problems are under time of supply. So illustration 16, determine the time of supply of goods in each of the following independent cases in accordance with provisions of section 12 of CGST Act 2017 in case supply involves movement of goods. So these are the three cases they have given us: date of removal, date of invoice, date when goods made available to the recipient, date of payment. So when you look into the solution, let us take into case 1. So in case 1, we have date of removal, which is on 1st July 2020. Date of issue of invoice is on 2nd July 2020. Then date when goods was received by the receiver is on 3rd July 2020, and the date of payment is 15th July 2020. So in this case, whichever is earlier will be the time of supply. So which is earlier in this case, it is 1st July 2020. So in the second case, date of removal is 3rd July 2020. Date of invoice is 1st July 2020. Date of recipient is 4th July 2020. And date of payment is 25th July 2020. So these are the activities which is being performed. So these are the dates. So among this date, whichever is early will be the time of supply. So the time of supply will be 1st July 2020. Then the case 3, date of removal is 4th August 2020. Date of invoices again 4th August 2020. So please change it here. It is 4th July 2020. Then date when goods were available to the recipient is 6th August 2020. Then date of payment is 1st July 2020. So among this situation, the event which has occurred earlier is date of payment, which is 1st July 2020. So whichever is earlier date will be considered as the time of supply. So that is 1st July 2020. So now let us get into the next problem. That is illustration 18, calculation of time of supply of goods. So determine the time of supply of goods in each of the following independent cases in accordance with provision of section 12 of the CGST Act 2017 in case supply involves movement of goods. So now in case supply involves movement of goods, so any supply which is made in movement of goods will come under section 12 of CGST Act 2017. So the same scenario which is given, three cases is given: date of removal, date of invoice, date when the goods are received by the buyer, and the date of which the payment was made. So in the first case, 1st July is the 1st July. If you look into the days, whichever is early will be applicable. So among these dates in the first case, which is early in the sense the date of removal is early, which is 1st July 2020. So we will be considering that as time of supply. So the reason is invoice is not issued on or before the date of removal of goods. So where invoice is not given before the goods are being removed from the supplier's place, and payment is received after the date of removal. So the payment is also received after the date of removal, and hence the time of supply is the date of removal of goods. So all these cases are not satisfied because the date of removal is earlier. So whichever is earlier in the following situation will be considered. And invoice is not given before the date of removal, and payment has also not been made before the date of removal, and the date on which goods were supplied available to the recipient is also not early. So next case is date of removal is 3rd July 2020, date of invoice is 1st July 2020, and the date at which the goods were available to the buyer is 4th July 2020. Then the date of receipt of payment is 25th August 2020. So in this scenario, date of invoice is earlier. So we will be taking 1st July 2020. So time of supply is the date of issuance of invoice, since it is issued prior to the date of removal of goods, and payment is received after the date of invoice. So this situation is earlier, that is date of invoice is earlier, and they have also given the reason that the date of issuance of invoice would be the time of supply, because it is issued prior to the date of removal of goods. Yes, invoice is issued before the date, before the goods are removed from the supplier's place, as well as the payment which is to be made. In the third case, date of removal is 4th August 2020. Date of invoice is again 4th August 2020. Then date when goods made available to the recipient is 6th August 2020. And date of recipient of the payment is receipt of payment is 1st July 2020. So in this case, it is the date of receipt of payment. So before the goods are removed from the supplier's warehouse, before the invoice date has been determined, the payment was made earlier. So the time of supply would be 1st July 2020 is the date of receipt of payment, since invoice is issued after date of receipt of payment. So in this case, whichever is early is applicable. So let us get into the last problem under time of supply. So under this is illustration 22. So determine the time of supply of goods in each of the following independent cases in accordance with provision of section 12 of the GST Act 2017 in case supply involves movement of goods. So now serial number is given, for situation is given here, date of actual provision of services is given, and time and date of invoice, bill or challan as the case may be. So the date of invoice is given, the date and date of which payment was received is also given. So let us take the first situation or first case. So date of service which was actually rendered is 10/11/2020. Then the invoice date is 30/11/2020. The date of payment received is in two part payments. So first part payment was 6th July and the second was 16th July. So now in this case, first we will look into the first part payment which was made. So in the three dates, the earlier date will be date of payment where half of the amount is received. So time of supply will be 6th July 2020, and uh, for the next payment, if you look into the remaining amount which is to be paid, the date of actual provision of the services, or when the service was actually rendered, will be early compared to 10/11/2020, 30/11/2020, and 60/11/2020. 10/11/2020 will be earlier. So 6/11/2020 and 16/11/2020 for the respective amount. Invoice issued within 30 days part payment in the form of advance received before issue of invoice, and the remaining payment received after completion of services. So under this calculation, so we need to understand the explanation which was made in the slide in your previous video. So in this slide it is mentioned, so when the time of supply of service is made, so as per section 13 of CGST, SGST, UTGST Act 2017, in case the invoice is issued within the prescribed period of 30 days from the date of completion of provision of services, the time of supply is date of invoice or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So if the invoice is not given within 30 days of the completion of the services or provision of services, you will be taking date of completion of provision of services or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So this is the situation what we are facing here. So here they are given us the actual services which is to be made. Uh, Before that, determine the time of supply of goods in each of the following independent cases in accordance with provision of Section 12 of CGST Act 2017 in if supply involves movement of goods. So in this, the supply involves movement of supply of services. So it will be Section 13. So any supply which is in case of goods, it will be Section 12. So if it's section 13, it will be supply of services. So here the problem is in supply of services. So now under the first situation, the actual date at which the service was rendered was on 10th November 2020. Then the invoice date is 30th November 2020. So when it is service, you should look into the date when was service rendered and the date of the invoice. So this is 10th November and this is 30th November. So the date is within 30 days. So the date the issuance of the invoice is within 30 days from the date at which the service was rendered. So the invoice is issued by the supplier within 30 days of the service which has been rendered by him. So now in this case, what will be the situation? So if it is within 30 days, you will be taking date of invoice and date of receipt of payment. So what is your date of invoice? 30th November 2020, and the date of which the payment was made, the first payment is 6th November 2020. So in both the cases, whichever is earlier. So whether 30th 11 2020 is earlier or 6th 11 2020 is earlier. So 6th November is earlier. So we will be considering 6th November for the first payment. So for the second payment, we need to look as it is within 30 days. So the service rendered and the date of issue of invoice is within 30 days. We will be taking the invoice date and the date at which the payment was received as per the conditions. We need to take date of invoice and date of receipt of payment. So here we will be comparing the date of invoice and the date of receipt of payment. So date of invoice is 30th November 2020 and the date at which payment was received is 16 November 2020. So which is earlier, 16 November 2020. So we will be taking the time of supply 16 November 2020 for the second installment or payment which was made. So the reason for it will be invoice issued within 30 days, part payment in the form of advance received before the issue of invoice and remaining payment received after completion of services. So as this services is rendered or the date of issue of invoice is rendered before within 30 days from the date of rendering services. So next is the date of actual provision of the service rendered is 10th November 2020. The invoice date is 12th December 2020. Then the date of payment which was made is 30th April 2021. So in this situation, the service is rendered after 30 days. That is, the invoice is not issued within 30 days. It is across 30 days. So because the provision which is a service it was made on 10th November and the invoice was given on 12th November. So it has crossed 30 days. So in this situation, you need to consider the second condition where you need to take date of completion of provision of services and the date of receipt into consideration. So among this, whichever is earlier will be applicable. So what is the date of completion of services? 10th November 2020, and the date at which the payment was received is 30th April 2021. So in this, which is earlier? So the earlier date is 10th November 2020. So the reason would be invoice not issued within 30 days and payment received after completion of services. Next is the third situation where the provision or the service rendered is 10th November 2020 and the time when the invoice was issued is 12th December 2020. In this case also, it is not within 30 days, it is crossed 30 days. So when it has crossed 30 days, so if it is 10th to 10th, fine, it is within 30 days. So it is 10th November and this is 12th December where 2 days it has crossed more than 30 days. So where it is 2 days more. So in this case, if it is not within 30 days, you need to take into consideration the second condition, which is date of completion of provision of services and date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier is applicable in this situation. So now there are part payments which is made. So the first payment was 5th November 2020. So in this case, you will be taking date of provision of services. So what is the date of provision of services? 10th November 2020. And what is the date of which payment was received, which is 5th November 2020. So which is earlier 5th November 2020. Then the remaining amount was issued on 25th December 2020. So again, as it is not within 30 days, you will be taking the second condition where the date at which the provision of services was rendered and the date of which the payment was received. So the date at which the service was rendered was on 10th November 2020 and the date at which the payment was made was the remaining payment was 25th December 2020. So which is earlier in this both the situation, that is the date at which the actual provision of services was made, that is 10th November 2020. So next is the fourth situation. The date of actual provision or services made is 10th November 2020, and the date of invoice is 22nd December 2020. So it is not within 30 days. So the invoice is given to the invoice is given to the buyer, uh, or to the person who has received the services. The invoice is given after 30 days, so which is not within 30 days. So if it is not within 30 days, then the second condition should be followed, where the date of actual provision of service is made or the date of which payment is received, whichever is earlier. So in this, the date of actual provision of service made is 10th November 2020, and the date of which payment is received is 12th December 2020. So among this, which is earlier, will be considered. So the earlier date is 10th November 2020. So the time of supply will be 10th November 2020. So invoice, reason for it is invoice not issued within 30 days and entire payment received after completion of services. So till now we have discussed problems of time of supply, and we have ascertained the time of supply for each activity which was performed. So the next topic what we are going to discuss is place of supply. So under this place of supply we will be determining which place is the actual supply made and what kind of GST will be imposed on it. So place of supply is usually for it is for or to know whether it is for intrastate supplies or to determine the place of supply for interstate supply of goods or determining the place of supply for interstate supply of goods. So when we know a place of supply is basically decided to know whether it is intrastate or whether it is interstate. So based on that the GST will be imposed on the supplies which is made. So the location of the supplier. So while determining the levy of taxes based on place of supply, two things are considered, namely location of supplier. So it is the registered place of business of a supplier. Then place of supply. It is the registered place of business of the recipient. So location of supplier and the place of supply is the recipient place. So basically it is used for determining the place of supply for intrastate supply of goods. So when the goods are supplied within the particular state, might be from if the goods are traded within Karnataka, it is within from Bangalore to Mysuru, and which is within the state which comes under intrastate. So we determine it as intrastate and we impose CGST and SGST. If the supply is from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, so where there are two states involved here. So when it is interstate, that is when two states are involved in supply of goods, then it is called as interstate supply of goods, where we charge IGST. So in order to know what kind of GST we are imposing on the goods, we need to know where is the place of supply. So there are specific provisions for determining the place of supply of goods, such as the place of supply of goods where the supply involves movement of goods and where the supply involves no movement of goods, and in case of export and or import of goods. So these provisions explains that place of supply of goods. So when place of supply other than goods imported into or exported from India. So here the supply can be either in the form of goods or either in form of services. So when in such cases, so when the supply involves movement of goods, location of goods where movement terminates for delivery will be the place of supply. So if goods are supplied by the transfer of document during movement of goods, so when goods are supplied by transferring the documents for the goods to be transferred from one place to the another, principal place of business of the third person on whose direction goods were supplied to another person. Supply does not involve movement of goods. So location, when the supply which does not involve goods to be moved from one place to another, then location of goods at the time of delivery will be considered as place of supply. So when goods are assembled or installed at site, place of such installation or delivery will be considered as place of supply. So if any goods which has been moved from one place to the another, and where particular goods are installed will be considered as place of installation or delivery. So when goods are supplied on board a conveyance, on board conveyances, when goods are engaged or supplied in while traveling in form of in train or in aircraft, then the then the location of such goods, where was it actually taken on board, when was the where at which place these goods entered into the boat will be considered. Then place of supply of goods cannot be determined. So in some cases you cannot determine the place of supply. So then in such cases place of supply shall be determined in such a manner as may be prescribed. So based on the that particular situation, whichever which either you can take into consideration the supplier's place or the recipient place when you are not able to determine the exact place of supply. So then place of supply of goods in case of import and exports. So goods imported from into India, place of supply of goods shall be the location of the importer. So the location of the importer will be considered as place of supply. So when goods are exported from India, place of supply of goods shall be the location outside India. So the place of supply will be location outside India when it is export from when the goods are exported. When the goods are imported, the location of the importer will be the place of supply. So these points are to be remembered. Next, we will be solving certain problems where you can understand clearly what kind of supplies are made and how the place of supply will be determined. So let us get into the problems of for place of supply, determining place of supply. In the first illustration, Mr. Raj of Mumbai, Maharashtra sells 10 TV sets to Mr. Vijay of Nagpur, Maharashtra. So here Mr. Raj from Mumbai sells which is Maharashtra, sells 10 TV sets to Mr. Vijay of Nagpur. So it is in the same state. So the place of supply is Nagpur in Maharashtra. So where is the receiver of the goods? Nagpur, Maharashtra. Since it is the same state, intrastate sales will be made. So when it is intrastate sales, CGST and SGST will be charged. Next illustration, Mr. Raj of Mumbai, Maharashtra sells 30 TV sets to Mr. Vinod of Bangalore, Karnataka. So now here it is from Maharashtra to the place of supply is where is the goods are exactly being received. It is in the place of the buyer, that is it is Bangalore. So the place of supply is Bangalore in Karnataka. Since it is different states, yes, it is from Maharashtra to Bangalore. It is interstate sales, so IGST will be charged. Next illustration 3, delivered to a third party as per instruction. Mr. Anand in Lucknow buys goods from Mr. Raj in Mumbai. So who's the buyer? Mr. Anand. He buys goods from Mr. Raj who's in Maharashtra. So now the buyer requests the seller to send the goods to Nagpur. So now the buyer is requesting the seller to move the goods to the third place, that is to Nagpur, Maharashtra. So what will be the place of supply? The buyer Anand is in Lucknow. Yes, he is in Lucknow. Buyer place is important, not delivery place. So as the buyer is in Lucknow, has received the goods and IGST will be charged. Yes. So in this case, the buyer place is important because delivery to a third party as per the instruction. So when Mr. Anand is buying goods from Mr. Raj on Mumbai, so Mr. Anand is located in Lucknow, which is Uttar Pradesh, buys goods from Raj, who is in Maharashtra. So which is between two different states. So then the buyer, that is Anand, requests the seller to send the goods to Nagpur. So the goods are being transferred to Maharashtra. So here the title of the goods is not being transferred. So the invoice will be in the name of Mr. Anand. So the the buyer's place is important rather than the delivery place. He is only moved the goods to the place in the Nagpur. So here the buyer is in Lucknow and the supplier is in Maharashtra. So here as per the invoice, the place of supply will be the buyer's place, which is Lucknow. So Lucknow is in in Uttar Pradesh. So Uttar Pradesh will be the buyer's place and the seller's place in Maharashtra, which is two different states where IGST will be charged. So buyer place is important, not delivery place, as the ownership of the goods are not yet transferred. So next illustration is receiver takes the goods ex factory Mr. Raj of Mumbai, Maharashtra gets an order of 100 TV sets from Sales Haven Limited of Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Sales Haven mentions that it will arrange its own transportation and takes TV set from Mr. Raj ex factory. So the receiver takes the goods ex factory Mr. Raj of Mumbai. Maharashtra gets an order of 100 TV sets. So the supplier is Sales Haven Limited of Chennai, and Mr. Raj of Mumbai, Maharashtra uh, gets an order of 100 TV sets from Sales Haven Limited of Chennai. I'm sorry. So here the supplier will be Mr. Raj of Mumbai of Maharashtra. So where they get an order from Sales Haven Limited of Chennai. So the buyer is from Chennai, which is Tamil Nadu. So there are two different states involved here. So here Sales Haven mentions that it will arrange its own transportation. So now if you look into here, the place of supply is Chennai. So where the buyer is. So IGST will be applicable. So here the goods are transported by the buyer itself will not be applicable. The place of supply of the receiver of the goods and the place of the supplier of the goods will be determined to determine whether it is IGST or whether it is intrastate or interstate. So here it is interstate because the supplier's place is in Maharashtra and the receiver's place is in Chennai. So the place of supply is Chennai, Tamil Nadu, IGST will be applicable. Next illustration 5. Mr. Ajay is traveling from Mumbai to Delhi by air. He purchased coffee and snacks. While on the plane, the airline are registered in both Mumbai and Delhi. So here the solution for it is, as Mr. Ajay is traveling from Mumbai to Delhi by air, so he purchases coffee and snacks in the plane. So they have asked us, and the airline is registered both in Mumbai and Delhi. They have asked us to determine the place of supply. So when did Mr. Ajay start his traveling from? So Mr. Ajay started his traveling from Mumbai. So this is the place at which he will start his journey. So the food items were loaded or boarded in the plane at Mumbai. So the place of supply becomes Mumbai. So the state. So there are two different. I'm sorry. As per the question, it is from. So traveling from Mumbai to Delhi by air. So under this special provisions, so any services which is rendered on board a conveyance or any conveyance which has been provided on board, that is on plane movements, then the food here, if you look into here, they in that cases location of the first scheduled point of departure of that conveyance for the journey. So for this journey, which is the first scheduled point of departure, is obviously Mumbai. So the place of supply will also be Mumbai. So for the first departure, the location of the first departure of the plane will be considered as the place of supply for any conveyance which is given. So here the supply, the customer gets boarded into the plane or gets into the departure place will be Mumbai to Delhi. So both Mumbai to Delhi. So here as he purchases coffee and snacks, we would be considering the departure time As the airlines are registered in both Mumbai and Delhi, it is Mumbai to Mumbai. So the place of supply would be considered as the first departure place. So when was the conveyance actually being boarded in the plane? So it is Mumbai to Mumbai. So we will be considering it as place of supply will be Mumbai because the items were loaded into the plane at Mumbai. So the place of supply becomes Mumbai. So it is intrastate supply. So CGST and SGST will be applicable. Next, illustration 6. Mr. Ajay is traveling from Mumbai to Chennai by air on behalf of his company Ram Gopal and Sons, which is registered in Bangalore. In the plane, he purchases lunch. The airline are registered in Mumbai and Chennai. So now, if any conveyance or services which is given on board, then you need to consider the location as the first place or the location of the first scheduled point of departure for conveyance of that journey. So here, what is the first schedule of departure or the location of departure is Mumbai. So when Mumbai is the first departure and the company or sorry, Mr. Rajai purchases lunch and the airlines is registered in Mumbai as well as Chennai. The place of location or the food items were loaded into the plane at Mumbai. So the place of supply becomes Mumbai. It does not matter where the buyer is registered. Place of supply is important. So the place of supply and the goods were first boarded was in Mumbai. So the GST which is charged will be CGST and SGST as it is intrastate supply. Next, Sales Event Limited, Chennai, where it is located in Chennai, opens a new showroom in Bangalore. It purchases a building. It purchases a building for showroom from ABC Realtor Real Estates Bangalore, along with pre-installed workstations. So, as I've already discussed, any installation which is made or any goods which are being assembled, the place of installation will be considered. So now the sales haven opens a new showroom in Bangalore. It purchases a building for showroom from ABC Relators along with pre-installed workstation. So here installation was already made and they have only purchases the building. So for any purchases which has been made, so there is no movement of goods. So there is no movement of goods or there is no movement of services here. So the place of supply will be the location of such goods at the time of delivery if it is any movement of goods. So as there are no movement of goods, there is no GST on purchase of building or part thereof. But if any rent is being paid or for that commercial place which is being used, then it attracts GST for rent. Then the place of supply will be Bangalore. CGST, where the GST to be charged will be CGST and SGST. So because the Sales Event Limited Chennai opens a new showroom in Bangalore, it purchases a building from show of the showroom from ABC Realtors, which is located in Bangalore. So as Sales Evans is opening a new showroom in Bangalore, and the showroom provider is also, or the person who's selling the building is also in Bangalore. So it is within the state, which is intrastate. So if he is paying rent and occupying that commercial space, then GST will be applicable. But here the Sales Evan is using purchasing the building itself to open a new showroom in Bangalore, and the supplier of that showroom or the seller of that showroom is also situated in Bangalore. It will be intrastate, so CGST and SGST will be applicable. So the next illustration is Strong Iron and Steel Limited, which is in Jharkhand, asks SAS Construction, West Bengal, to build a blast furnace in their Jharkhand steel plants. So now here this case installing goods. So place of supply Jharkhand, intrastate supply. So GST will be CGST and SGST. So who's the supplier? Strong Iron and Steel Limited. So they are located in Jharkhand. They are asking SAS Construction, which is in West Bengal, to build a blast furnace in their Jharkhand steel plant. So now So I have already discussed that when it comes to installation, the place of installation will be considered as the place of supply. So we will as the supplier is, I'm sorry, Strong Iron Limited, who is the receiver, who is located in Jharkhand, and the supplier of that particular services or to build a blast furnace is SAS Construction, who is in West Bengal. So it can be two different states are being involved here. So now we need to look into the place where the installation is being made. So it is to build a blast furnace in their Jharkhand steel plant. So they want their blast furnace to be built in their place. So the buyer is the service receiver is in Jharkhand and the supplier is in West Bengal. So where is the actual activity taking place, or where is the installation is actually happening within that particular state, that is in the buyer state itself. So the receiver and the place at which the installation is made in the same place. So the GST which is applicable will be CGST and SGST. So the next illustration 9. Mr. Vinod is traveling to Mumbai via train. So the train starts at Delhi and stops at certain station before Mumbai. So Vinod boards the train at Gujarat, which is Vadodara, and promptly purchases lunch on board. So in this case, the food items were loaded into the train at Delhi because the journey is starting at Delhi. So I've already discussed any service or which has been rendered, or any conveyance which is rendered on board, that is a service rendered while traveling, so on board, then that services will be considered, that is the departure, the location which is scheduled at first departure or location will be considered as the place of supply. So here the first location is Delhi. So Delhi will be considered as the place of supply for any services or conveyance which is being provided through the travel which has been made. So here when he buys something, it can be lunch, it can be snacks, it can be anything. So the place of the first departure of the that particular travel will be considered as the place of supply. So here the place of supply will be Delhi. So the place of supply, as it becomes Delhi, the place of supply, the GST charge will be CGST and SGST. So it will be considered as the buyer will is also will be as got into the train from Delhi, and the supply is also made in Delhi. So both are in the same intrastate, so which is in the same state. So CGST and SGST will be applicable. Then under illustration 10, supplier located in Kolkata supplies machinery to the recipient in Delhi. The machinery is installed in the factory of the recipient in Kanpur, place which is the place of supply. So I've already explained your installation. When it comes to installation or assembly, the place at which the exactly that the service is made would be considered. That is the place at which installation is being considered. Installation made will be considered as the place of supply. So here the supplier is in Kolkata and the recipient is in Delhi. So here the supplier is in Kolkata and the recipient is Delhi. But where is the installation made? It is made at Kanpur. So in this case, the place of supply of machinery will be Kanpur because the installed factory is situated in Kanpur. So they have asked what is the place of supply. So the place of supply will be Kanpur. Then, if you ask me what kind of GST will be imposed for this supply, it is obviously IGST will be applicable because the supplier space is in Kolkata and the installation which is made is actually in Kanpur. So it is two different states, so which is West Bengal and which is Uttar Pradesh. So the location of the supplier is will be in Kolkata, West Bengal, and the supply and the receivers, the place at which the supply was actually made is in Kanpur, which is in Uttar Pradesh. So the installation is actually made in interstate. So IGST will be applicable here. So thank you everyone. So this is the end of your place problems on place of supply. So where you will be determining what is or which place is the supply actually made in different situations. So in the next video we will be discussing what is value of supply and the problems under value of supply.